The noon train shrieked as it slowed into the small station, steam hissing across the platform like a sigh of disappointment. Dust rose around the wheels, settling on skirts and boots, and the townsfolk turned their heads the way they always did when new faces arrived, curious, measuring, already whispering before the first step was taken. Clara Hensley descended last, a thin figure clutching the small hand of her daughter. Her dress, once blue, had dulled with miles of travel. Her shoes were cracked, her cheeks hollow, yet her back was straight, her eyes sharp, as if dignity were the only possession she refused to lose. Beside her, little Mary Beth blinked against the brightness, clutching a worn rag doll and pressing close to her mother's side. Waiting near the end of the platform was a man in a press coat, heavy gold watch chain gleaming across his belly. He looked Clara over with a squinting eye, as though she were a horse he regretted bidding on. His mouth twisted, and the first words he gave her were not greeting, but judgment. Thin as a fence rail, he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Not fit for what I was promised. Clara stiffened, tightening her hand around her daughter's. She opened her mouth, but he raised a palm as if to halt her before she began. I won't have it, he said, turning away with a grunt. Send her back for all I care. His boots struck hard against the wood as he disappeared into the crowd, leaving her and Mary Beth stranded before the eyes of the town. The silence that followed was worse than the insult. It pressed in like heat, thick with murmurs. A woman in a bonnet leaned toward her friend. Poor creature, already tossed aside. A boy snickered. Guessed the rancher wanted meat, not bones. Even Sheriff Boone, leaning against a post, shook his head as though pity were no better than scorn. Clara lowered her eyes, cheeks burning, yet held herself still, refusing to let them see her tremble. Mary Beth buried her face in her skirt. They had nowhere to go, not in this strange place. The boarding house door closed quickly when Clara asked for a room. No coin, no bed, Etta Calloway said with sharp satisfaction. The saloon owner turned her away before she'd finished offering her hands for scrubbing. The church gave her bread, but no welcome. Each door that closed seemed to brand her with the word unwanted. That night, she and Mary Beth curled beneath the eaves of the livery, the girl's breath a soft flutter against her mother's arm, the stars wheeling overhead as if to remind her how small and far from home she had fallen. Clara pressed her lips against her daughter's hair and whispered, "Sleep, little one. Tomorrow will be better." But her stomach growled, and the frost in the air bit down with no mercy. Days blurred. She stretched coins until they were paper thin, feeding Mary Beth scraps while pretending she wasn't hungry. She washed her face in the trough at dawn to keep a semblance of pride. She walked streets where whispers trailed her like dust. The rejected bride, the woman not good enough even for a fat rancher. Shame gnawed at her, but she met every gaze with silence, for silence was her only shield. It was during one of those long afternoons, when the sun baked the earth into cracked clay, that she first noticed the tall rancher moving through town. Jonah McGraw, they called him, a man whose wife had been gone 2 years, who raised his little girl alone. Clara saw him at the mercantile, lifting sacks of flour as though they weighed nothing, his daughter Abigail clutching the hem of his coat. He did not look at Clara then, but Abigail did, her wide eyes catching on Mary Beth. With the sudden boldness only children know, she dug a dried apple slice from her pocket and placed it in Mary Beth's hand. Clara started to refuse, shame rising hot, but Mary Beth's hunger was quicker. She nibbled the slice, and Jonah finally looked up. His gaze held hers for a single unbroken moment, steady, unpitying, as though he saw not her disgrace, but simply a mother keeping her child alive. That night, Clara and Mary Beth tried to sleep again outside the livery. The blanket they had was thin as paper, the wind sharp. From the shadows a shape approached, and Clara rose in alarm, arm outstretched before her daughter. But it was Jonah, silent, a rolled wool blanket in his hands. He said nothing, only laid it beside her, then walked away. She stared after him, words trapped in her throat, until the night swallowed him whole. Mary Beth snuggled into the gift, sighing with comfort, And for the first time in many nights, Clara felt warmth not born of her own endurance. The gossip sharpened. Jonah's gone soft, Ed had told anyone who'd listen. Still moons over his dead wife. Now taking pity on strays. Mark me, that woman will ruin him. Clara heard and wanted to disappear, yet she could not deny the truth in the warmth around her child, or the quiet strength of the man who had given it. Days later, she found him waiting near the well. He stood with his hat in hand, eyes lowered before he finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, without ornament. "Your daughter needs a home," he said. "My daughter needs a mother." Clara's chest tightened. She shook her head at once, shame flashing like lightning. "I won't be taken in for pity." "It isn't pity," he replied. "It's need, plain and simple." She looked down at Mary Beth, whose thin arms wrapped around her doll. She looked at Abigail, watching from behind Jonah's leg, her gaze full of longing for a hand to hold beside her father's. The world tilted, caught between hunger and pride. Clara's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She turned instead, drawing Mary Beth close, the offer hanging heavy in the air between them. Behind her, Jonah did not call after. He only waited, still as the prairie sky, as though he knew her decision would come not in that moment, but in the quiet hunger of many nights to follow. The train tracks gleamed in the distance, carrying echoes of promises broken, while the murmurs of the town swirled like dust. Clara's heart beat hard in her chest as she walked away, Jonah's words echoing with each step. And for the first time since she arrived, she feared that her pride might cost her more than her shame ever had. ChatGPT said, "The mornings on Jonah McGraw's ranch began with silence, broken only by roosters and the creak of the windmill." Clara rose before the sun, tying her hair with a strip of cloth, her body still thin but steadier now, her hands already finding rhythm in a kitchen that had long gone quiet. Mary Beth trailed her like a shadow, while Abigail, shy at first, soon clung to the newcomer with an eagerness that surprised them all. The girls' laughter filled the house in bursts, as if walls long and used to such music were learning to carry it again. Jonah said little, yet each morning when he walked in from the barn, his eyes softened at the sight of his daughter smiling, as though he'd been given back something he thought buried with his wife. Clara knew she had stepped into a place she did not yet deserve. She told herself she was only help, keeping house until she found her footing. Yet when she saw the way Mary Beth and Abigail whispered secrets beneath quilts or chased chickens until feathers flew, the pretense weakened. At night, she sometimes lingered in the doorway of their shared room, listening to their breath even out, wondering if this was what safety sounded like. The town, however, did not forgive so easily. At church, when Clara knelt beside Jonah, whispers moved like prairie fire. Etta Calloway's voice cut sharp as she passed, loud enough for every ear. Took her in like a stray mutt. No vows, no ring, just shame parading in her Sunday best. Clara flushed, bowing her head, fingers trembling against Mary Beth's shoulder. Jonah did not answer, but his hand steadied her elbow as they walked out, and though he said nothing, the gesture braced her more than words could. Still, she felt the eyes upon her long after they left the chapel. Jonah's kindness was not loud. One morning, Clara discovered her worn shoes mended, the leather stitched firm by hands rough from ranch work. She traced the seams with her fingers, knowing he'd labor by lamplight while she slept. Another day, he found her patching his shirt at the table and paused, watching the thread pull neat lines. He did not thank her, but when his hand brushed hers to take the finished garment, the warmth lingered longer than cloth should hold. They shared coffee on the porch at dawn, silence flowing between them like a river. It was not absence of words, but the fullness of something unspoken, steady as the sunrise. Yet the shadow of rejection did not loosen easily. One afternoon, as Clara carried laundry from the line, she saw Sanford, the rancher who had once scorned her, leaning on the fence rail. His smirk coiled like a snake. "McGraw's a fool," he drawled. "Takes in cast-offs, thinks it makes him noble. Folks say he's ruining his name with you hanging about. Guess you're good at spoiling men's reputations." His laugh scraped the air. Clara's hands tightened on the basket, but she turned away. Still, his words sank deep, reopening the wound of that first day at the station. That night, she heard Mary Beth stir in her sleep, whispering "Mama," with a note of fear, and Clara wept quietly, afraid she was damning them both by staying. The gossip grew teeth. Sheriff Boone stopped Jonah outside the saloon, his tone half warning, half pity. Best wed her proper, or let her go. The town won't stomach halfway measures forever. Jonah only tipped his hat, but the lines in his face deepened. Clara sensed the weight pressing on him, though he never spoke of it. The breaking point came at the church social, lanterns strung high, fiddles scraping cheerful tunes. Clara had dressed simply, smoothing Abigail's braids while Mary Beth clutched her hand. For a moment, she felt almost welcome, watching the girl spin in circles with giggles bright enough to drown the whispers. But Sanford's voice cut through the music, cruel and loud. "Look there," he jeered, lifting cup of punch. "The bride who wasn't good enough. McGraw, you've yoked yourself to bones and shame. No wonder your ranch is failing. You've got a curse in your house." Laughter rippled from a few corners, sharp and stinging. Clara froze, her face burning. Mary Beth pressed against her skirts. Abigail stepped in front of her like a small sentinel. The fiddle faltered into silence. Jonah set his cup down slowly. He stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his voice low but carrying. "That woman has kept 2 children fed when the world offered her nothing. She's worked without complaint, stood against your scorn, and still walks with more grace than you'll ever touch. She is my daughter's mother now. My choice. And no man's sneer can take that from me." The words struck harder than fists. A hush spread, the crowd shifting uneasily, eyes darting between Sanford's bluster and Jonah's quiet certainty. Clara felt her knees weaken, not from shame this time, but from the sudden lifting of it. For the first time, she was defended, not as a charity, but as someone worth standing for. Sanford sputtered, tried to laugh it off, but the weight of silence turned against him. He left with muttered curses, the crowd dispersing in uneasy murmurs. Clara's breath came unsteady. Jonah returned to her side without fanfare, his face calm as ever. Yet when his hand brushed the small of her back to guide her home, the touch carried the promise of belonging. Back at the ranch, the girls slept tangled in quilts, heads close together, dreaming the easy dreams of children who felt safe. Clara sat by the hearth, the flames painting her face with light and shadow. Jonah lingered nearby, hat in hand, eyes lowered as if waiting. The room was quiet but charged, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Her heart pounded. She thought of the blanket he'd left without a word, of the shoes stitched in secret, of the porch silences that spoke louder than declarations. She thought, too, of her pride, her shame, the long hunger that had defined her days. All of it stood at the edge of something new. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time she did not see a man pitying her, nor a widower reaching for convenience. She saw a choice being offered, steady and true. Jonah's eyes met hers, unflinching. He did not repeat his proposal. He only waited. Clara's lips parted, the firelight catching the tremor in her breath. Somewhere in the house, the girls stirred, one whispering the other's name in sleep. The sound threaded through the stillness like a vow waiting to be spoken. And in that fragile moment, with shame behind her and the unknown ahead, Clara knew the answer rising her chest would change the shape of every day to come.